boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. All I ask is that you think.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, and welcome to the Just My 3 Cents podcast, where we make it make sense. A live, interactive, rapid fire dialogue where you can participate by hitting the link that you see in the comment sections, whether you're on YouTube, the Mental Dialogue Facebook page, or my personal Facebook page. You can join tonight's discussion. It could be about what I'm talking about. It could be anything happening in the news. Again, I am Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. I love to philosophize on race, sex, and culture. So if you have a topic you want to bring with that in mind, please be willing to hit the link. I never want these shows to be 30 minutes of just me talking, if you will. But I always kick it off with the subject matter. And so if you've seen the promotions, whether on IG or Mental Dialogue, tonight's discussion, let me make sure I say it exactly right. Give me a second here. Tonight's discussion that we're opening with, again, you can jump on, talk about what I'm talking about, or bring a topic to the table. But tonight's discussion is African American DNA, get out of Egypt and over to West Africa. Get out of Egypt and get over to West Africa is where I want to, in a sense, start the discussion. Again, our ultimate goal is to raise the culture, but we can do that together, not just listen to what I have to say. I don't profess to be any type of leader. My gift is basically bringing context to thoughts that are out there. And so hopefully we can dialogue together and, in a sense, raise the culture with, to a degree, how our community sees and thinks about things. And it's really, this discussion really ends up being a build on something that's kind of been a running theme throughout several of the Just My 3 Cents podcasts. Again, I do this mostly on Wednesday nights. Sometimes I have to do it on Thursday, but either way, make sure you're following us on Mental Dialogue IG in order to keep up with what we're doing. But with that said, it's been a running theme when I did a show on race being a social construct and just kind of dabbling into what that looks like. And I think this, to a degree, is a continuation of just breaking down, if you will, that construct. When you think about how popular DNA testing, if you will, has become over the past few years, and to a degree, something of importance to a lot of African Americans naturally, as we, in a sense, reach back to figure out, in a sense, some of our history, if you will. We always talk about our unique history of, in a sense, coming here and as African Americans, with our ancestors mostly being African, if you will, the idea that we, in a sense, have someone else's last name. And so the DNA search, while important to a lot of cultures, there are a lot of people in the African American community that really advocate for DNA testing. And then sometimes there's even dialogue about how accurate they are, and things of that nature. I will say that, in a sense, science continues to improve on this DNA testing, if you will. And so it continues to get better, if you will, and DNA can go very, very deep. I'm not going to get into the science or whatever. That's not necessarily my area of expertise. Some of you may know I'm, to a degree, a small scientific enthusiast, if you will. So again, just highlighting that DNA testing just gets better and better over the years or whatever. But again, not to get into the accuracy, but just talk about, again, in general, how we see ourselves as African Americans when it comes to this idea of getting or needing DNA testing, if you will. And so quite often people are surprised, if you will, about what they end up finding out once they take the DNA test, as far as, in a sense, where they're from. A lot of times as African Americans, we have these ideas about, where our origins are. There's this idea of us even being indigenous to the country, or a lot of African American community families will even suggest that they have a lot of Native American blood, and that becomes something that is part of their history. And then sometimes they're surprised at the time of the DNA test. And so as DNA testing has improved, for the most part, there's just general idea that African Americans, as more and more get their DNA tests, they're finding out that a large majority of, to me, no surprise, a lot of us our people tend to have come from Western and Central Africa, right? That's what we're starting to find out. But we had a show this past Saturday on the Mental Dialogue Talk Show where we were talking about the idea of the conscious community. And so when we started finding out, as people have gotten their DNA tests and continue to find out, again, that a lot of us are from Western and Central Africa, which shouldn't be a huge surprise since that's where a bulk of, if you will, the transatlantic enslavement trade took place. So it shouldn't be a huge surprise. But the thing is, prior to DNA becoming popular, there was this idea, as we became conscious, there was this idea of kind of looking to Egypt, if you will, right? We were looking to Egypt. And so as we were, in a sense, sometimes as we were kind of coming into our consciousness, we would identify a lot with the Egyptian culture because we, in a sense, respect where it is placed in history and how it looks in civilization. And so to a degree, we would look to Egypt, if you will. And then as we started taking DNA tests, we start, in a sense, finally connecting to our most immediate, if you will, ancestors prior to coming to the country. And again, obviously I'm generalizing, but I'm highlighting that because even in finding it out, I know individuals who've even taken the trip to, in a sense, where the area where most of their, people were from based on their DNA testing, and even got integrated into tribes in West Africa. I know some people that have actually done that, but I point that out because it ended up being, to a degree, real unique to see an individual do that and connect again with that immediate situation, right? It became unique because even in us starting to find out that a lot of us are, in a sense, from West Africa who've done, I haven't done the DNA, let me even put that out there real quick or whatever, but just in finding out people starting to do it, we still haven't made in general, in my opinion, what I see out publicly, a general connection to West Africa. And I think that's very important. I got my man Bobby Banger wanting to jump on this thing with me. What's going on, King?
What's going on with you, bro? How you doing, man?
Doing well. Glad you could jump on with me. And let me get this highlight, from my man Bobby Banger from this standpoint. This brother has taught me a lot about DNA. Let me even put this out there very clearly. And he could probably correct it if I say it wrong. But to a degree, some people will even misunderstand actually what a DNA test could do for you. And in general, it just basically ends up being genetic markers where your people, in a sense, what region they had passed through and have been through. And so it kind of just gives you an idea where the majority of your people are from as a genetic marker, if you will. And that's just a generalized thing. But again, the reason I'm highlighting it or name this show this is because coming into the conscious community and reaching all the way to Egypt is something that we've done. And I highlight that because, in my opinion, a big reason we were doing that, and I did it myself before I even thought about even doing a DNA test. Again, I have not done one, but a big reason we were doing that is because there's a level of psychological race esteem that quite often is missing. And when you go through 12 years of the public school system and only see the same 12 figures every Black History Month, if you will, right? And so in capturing and finding out more of our history, in my opinion, we started over-identifying with Egyptian history, for one, and really anywhere that anything appeared to be Black, we started identifying it. And this brother right here came on my show one time and pointed out, when you don't get the actual facts, sometimes you will make yourself be everybody. You will have no form of your accurate history, so you still don't know who you are. And again, the reason we seek that or have a desire to know who we are, which is human, all groups do it. Most people have not been disconnected from their history in the manner that we as African Americans have. So to a sense, we get so lost, we start assuming that we're indigenous. We start assuming that we are the Egyptians. We start doing everything but talking about where we know there was a disconnect. that West African, Central African to here. We don't even really talk about that much, in my opinion, from what I see out there. I'm gonna play this one clip, and then I want to get your thoughts, Bobby Banger. Again, thanks for jumping on this thing for me. And this is just last piece of clarity on DNA, and we're gonna get directly into this. And I'm gonna let you jump off however you want to, Bobby Banger, right after this clip. So I'm gonna share the screen and play about a minute and a half, 2-minute max clip, just really narrowing down in general where our DNA kind of shows we are from. Again, this doesn't apply to everyone, but in general, this is fair for us in general for African Americans. Let me share this 1 or 2 minute clip, and then I'm gonna go to Bobby Banger.
That Black people are descended from Africans and thus are considered to fall into an ethnic group which we refer to as African American. This ethnic group is something taken very seriously by most people. Even those of mixed race are typically considered black if their skin is even moderately dark in comparison to a white person. People who fall into this category will never be considered white by their peers. Barack Obama, for example, is considered America's first ever black president, despite the fact that his mom is white. All of that aside, though, just how African are African Americans really? And I'm not talking about Barack Obama either. I'm talking about the average, undeniably black people whom we see the most frequently, those who don't show any clear evidence of recent white admixture, like Terry Crews or Oprah Winfrey. So firstly, it's quite obvious that the majority of African Americans fully acknowledge their African heritage, with a few exceptions. However, despite acknowledging their African heritage, very few blacks in the United States really truly know the specific countries, regions, or ethnic groups that their ancestors belong to. It's also very common for people of African descent to make claims of significant Native American admixture in the past. Even in my own experience from my own family, Native American heritage is something that both my mother and my father claim to have from both sides of my family, with Blackfoot and Cherokee admixture respectively. Seeing as this is a very common trend among the black community, most of my life, I assumed that a very significant amount of African American genetics would bear signatures from Native American peoples. However, upon researching this topic further, I discovered that the average African American only carries around 0.8% Native American ancestry, with studies from the National Library of Medicine showing that only roughly 22% of African Americans carry any Native American ancestry at all, and that the average African American genetic makeup goes as follows: 73.2% African, 24.0% European, and 0.8% Native American. However, these figures only add up to 98%, and where that extra 2% belongs is really not mentioned. However, my guess is that it may just be a vague other category. So let's see how my old DNA results compare.
Bobby Banger, let me know. Did that video play? I hope it did. You know, I'm still trying to figure out these boards. I hope I played it right. You still there, bro?
Yeah, I couldn't hear you. What'd you say?
I said, did that video play well?
Yeah, I can hear it a little bit.
Oh, it wasn't. Oh man, it wasn't loud. Oh man, that's
yeah,
bad.
I heard
Okay.
it. I heard it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
all right, sounds good. Okay, so I don't think I want to say it. I'm gonna let you jump off. So that was just a kind of a baseline. Again, a lot of us thinking that again, Native American heritage and things of that nature. And again, some of you may have it. You may be in that 22% in general. But again, this nice discussion was get over to West Africa, and I highlight that. You know, you and I had a discussion about this about a week ago, Bobby Banger, and the whole point was just for me was our disconnect happened from the in the transatlantic enslavement trade. We don't know much about our immediate ancestors, what our names may have been before we took on these American, you know, my name's Smith, if you will, right? So we don't know much about that. So I found if we're going to go into African history, that should be, in my opinion, a point that we should study, because it's the thing that we know least about, versus jumping over to Egypt, which I think is done a lot of times for our feel good psychologically, but I don't know how much it serves us today. Your thoughts, King? You got a lot of background noise, just so you know.
Yeah, that's impossible to defeat that right now.
It's all good.
Yeah, basically, the Egypt is, and I'm saying Kemet. I like to use the word Kemet because that's actually the name that connects the place to Africa. Egypt is some place in the Mediterranean somewhere. So I think certain names are actually problematic. But to get straight to the point, African Americans jump straight to Egypt because we have been taught that that's the greatest Black civilization, right? It's the classical civilization, and you hear people rant and rave about it. Now, the funny part about it is that there's another superpower that existed, that coexisted with Egypt, right? But it's the racism and Egyptology that actually made that superpower relegated to the Negro race, right? And relegated to the ash cans of history. So nobody wants to be a Negro, right? Now, nobody wants to be a Negro to the point where nobody wants to study West Africa, because that's where we lost at. Okay, we were feeble people and we got defeated. Why would I want to celebrate that? So it's a lot of mental stress going on, right? Why people dive straight to Kemet, leave, don't even talk about the southern portion of the Nile. They don't have no conversation about that, right? Superpower. These people are filthy rich down there. I mean, filthy rich, right? So we don't want to talk about that. We run straight to Kemet, right? Because, you know, Kemet is the classical standard, right? But nobody talks about West Africa and the standards that were set. Like I say this all the time, right? Like, I get your point, right? Because it's the closest history we got, right? And as far as chronology goes, you know, I always say, man, it don't matter where you start at. At the end of the day, you need to get all of it, right? But it would seem the closest thing to us would be West Africa. No one talks about that. Like, I had a chance to really dove into it, right? When the pandemic came around, right? Because I argue that the greatest invention known to humanity, right, that helped humanity wasn't the pyramids. The pyramids is just something you look at. The pyramids actually really speak to the grandeur, right? Where they decide to spend resources at. Okay, how much workforce could we put together, you know what I'm saying, to build for the great king, right? That's what they really represent, right? But there's an invention in West Africa, right, that actually helped save humanity. And that's inoculation that was brought forth by the quote unquote slaves, kidnapped victims, right? They brought that. So slave colonies in North America was blessed with the African presence of and the knowledge and wisdom of medicine with inoculation, fighting the pathogen with the pathogen, right? So we don't have to put our nose down on West Africa. You know, for me, I say study all of Africa, because people in Africa coalesce more with us than people do in Europe, people do in Australia, people do in North America and South America, no matter what we want to say. So for me, right, I understand the chronology, but it's a mental breakdown, Montoya, that would keep you only in Kemet and ignore your great West African history.
Strong point. Let me highlight that real quick and ask you some more about West Africa, if you will, because again, you know, let me highlight my man Bobby Banger from Pseudo Killers. This brother's put in a lot of work and know a lot of this history just based on what he's done, and I respect him. Again, knows a lot about DNA as well. This is not a DNA discussion. I want to highlight it if you just tuned in. But with that said, again, let's just dig into the psychology of us skipping over the point that he's talking about. He's exactly right. There is a psychological disdain. Even think about this. Even when you're going through a public school, if you've went through that or whatever to a degree, if the way you study American history only shows, again, just a few heroes you might get during Black History, but the rest of the year just only points to the idea that you as a Black person or African American was a slave, then it makes sense why you never want to watch a slavery movie after you leave high school, and why you don't want to study that story, because there's a meme that we love on social media that says African American history didn't start with slavery. While we love that meme, the reason we love it is because, as he's saying, we didn't want to hear about it, and then as he just mentioned, it's the point in which we were taken. So there is a psychology for why, if you've seen this out here, where people will get all up in arms about us being indigenous to the country, and to the degree that it becomes how they over-identify, or even Egypt, you know, again, even though it may be in our chronological history, if you will, if you keep going further and further back, if you will, even though it may be, but I jump to romanticize it and see it, like he said, as the gold standard of civilization, as and to be fair, it ain't something that we did. Like he just mentioned, Egyptology. That was, in a sense, what white people did when they tried to take Egypt completely out of Africa, if you will. So there was a lot of flim-flam going on with that because it was identified as this great civilization. So a lot of people have wanted to claim it. So I'm not knocking us, even as African Americans, as wanting to do so. I'm just adding the clarity that if you're going to go back and search and start getting into DNA, come to find out, not only as Bobby Banger brings this point, and I've highlighted it myself for those who follow me and know I'm a science enthusiast, that we taught Western American inoculations. That's why we have vaccines. Whether you're on the side or against it or not doesn't matter to me. The reality is they learned it from us. And with that said, Bobby Banger, if you don't mind, because I know you noticed some of this history, let's build some of that bridge. A little bit. I know, for example, like. We understand that our African ancestors brought a lot to American culture, but the fact that we don't know what those things are it matters. We brought watermelon to this culture. You know what I'm saying? We showed we showed this country how to properly do rice in this country.
Yeah,
we brought black eyed peas to this country. Most of I'm gonna mute it for a quick second. Most of the world knows this, and it's sad. I'm a huge music lover, and most of the world, if you go outside of the U.S., if you ever travel outside the U.S., and if you travel places where they like any type of U.S. music, any American music, for the most part, other cultures know that American music is founded by Black Americans, generally speaking, for the most part, especially before the genres just expanded into all the stuff we have now. But we are the origins behind rock and roll. We are the origins behind blues. We are the origin behind country music, believe it or not. Most of the world knows that. I graduated in high school and did not know that because I was a music lover. I found it out in college on my own, not because of a college class, but just in my own research. So there's so much that our ancestors that were brought from that period that we know the least about brought to this culture and is a part of American culture. It's the reason Carter G. Woodson wanted Negro History Week to eventually be morphed into American history. I made a point on one of Bobby Banger's show, I'm bringing him back live, where I was going back and forth with a brother that he was shocked for that I said that, because he's in a sense trying to separate Black history. Well, Carter G. Woodson understood we are mightily and heavily involved in the formation of this country, and he wanted it fully acknowledged because it wasn't being taught in schools. Go ahead, Bobby Bang, and I'm gonna read the comments after you talk.
Yeah, so it's just impressionist art. I went to the Baltimore School for the Arts, man, and the impressionist artists, right, of the time, actually, they get that from West Africa. You can look that up. That's just not nothing to make up. I think that the point I really want to make very, very clear is that we should not shun any of our history. We're not going to allow white people to claim that they built the Great Walls in Zimbabwe. They claim that this great white race migrated to Zimbabwe and built those structures. So whenever you found a great leap in technology or great leap in building or just culture, they relegated to the right ways. This was part of the scientific racism. And so our elders, our ancestors, those that precede us, had to fight for classical civilization. You cannot give away classical civilizations on Africa. You can't give away Egypt. You can't give away Nubia. You can't give away South African culture. Myself personally, I've always talked about the crucible of cultures in South Africa, right? I talked about this, how the South African population is really the seed people, right, for all humanity. I talk about how they actually saved humanity. So we can chew gum, right, and walk at the same time. We need to look at Africa in totality, right? But in chronology, and you prefer the chronological order, right? I prefer we get to it, period. So, I appreciate you bringing me through, and I appreciate your vigor and your love for West Africa, man. So, man, appreciate the support, man. Make sure y'all like and subscribe to the damn channel, man.
Thanks a lot. Real quick before you go, because I got a couple comments. If you can get, I know it's like you might need to go, and I don't want to hold you up.
I got it.
Okay, one quick thing. There was something you were talking about. Like, give me something that was done in West Africa that most African Americans don't know in your research. Just something, you know. I mean, like I remember one brother broke down that you know, there's a Great Wall, you know, whatever, that I didn't even know about. I need to learn this myself. I'm admitting this. So just give me one point and get out this thing.
Well, they realized early on when the invisible death came through, they knew how to space and wear masks. So social distancing is a West African thing, literally. Social distancing, okay? So wearing masks, right? They didn't even understand what a virus was, but it was the techniques that they developed that kind of moved them forward and kept them safe, right? When this invisible death came through. Right, they would burn down certain towns and things of that nature. You know, out of this, you start to get Europe start to practice these things later on, like the great pandemic 100 years ago. Okay, where they started to wear masks and stuff like that. So wearing masks is not a new thing for African people. Remember, we the first people on Earth, and so we went through many a pandemics, many a outbreaks, right? And I just want to kind of just let people know when you're fighting against wearing masks, right? Specifically African Americans, and when you're fighting against vaccinations, specifically African Americans.
Yeah, you done found your way back. I was hoping to get some of that stuff you told me last week. Some of them facts that was, you know, you keep one on the one same thing, but I gotta let you go. I only got a few minutes, man. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Peace. Appreciate that, man.
Yeah. All right, appreciate thanks for coming on. Hey, yeah, anybody could have hit that link. Let me try to run through these comments. They've been running real hard while this brother was talking. So let's see here. Jendaya has been saying a lot here. So let me see if I can say it all together, because she said several things back to back. She said, we can acknowledge and pay homage to Kemet, the foundation, beginning of civilization, without being disrespectful or dismissive to West Africa. I disagree with most of that. Yeah, jump on, Queen. I mean, I only got a few minutes. I'm trying to keep them at 35 minutes. Several of us in our spirit are not, in my experience, are not relocating to Kemet or headed to the west and the east to pay homage to Kemet. Okay. I don't know what you're disagreeing with, as much as I was just highlighting that a lot of us don't know a lot about West Africa, at least in my opinion, in my own self. So I'm talking about myself too. So let me say that. I don't know if I necessarily made up, but if you want to get on here and tell me what you disagree with, I don't think I understand what you disagree with to a degree. Although I do think there is to a degree, in my opinion, I will say this, there is a psychology to being devoid of even learning our history in the U.S. Because if you only learn it the way it's taught to you in public school, I get that. Why would I only want to learn that my ancestors were enslaved? That's not all we were in this country. So I do get what I could see sometimes as the psychology, I will say, just of avoidance of even knowing that. And the reason I think this is so important, not to, in a sense, be, to avoid the actual things that we've done in this country. I'm not talking about just showing that we're enslaved. We've done a lot of things in this country that we don't know about. I always tell parents, make sure you shore up your children's public education, just so that they see some of themselves. It's not an idea of having to know all of the history or anything like that. I think Corey made that reference, that even Africans don't look at Africa in totality. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. So I can support that thought. What I would like to highlight, though, is just from the standpoint of shoring up your children's education, from the standpoint, if you know they're only going to be shown one aspect, which is the negative aspect, then make sure you are shoring up that history, because everyone needs to know they came from something. Oh, the sister that just jumped on, I was about to let you on. I don't know, maybe she didn't mean to jump on. Queen, come back on this thing. I'll let you in this thing. I'm sorry. I was just finishing up my comment, about to jump you back on this thing. Maybe she didn't mean to. So, Queen, I just saw you jump in there. I was about to let you on. All right. So anyway, I'm just saying. Okay, here she. This is another. So this is Jada. Well, let me let Jada speak for herself, because I didn't quite understand what she disagreed with. All right, go ahead, Queen. We're gonna let it. When y'all jump on, we'll extend it a little bit. Go ahead, Queen.
Okay, so pretty much what I'm saying is it's not necessarily like an either or, although we do have a tendency to, to speak and even make a genuine connection with Kemet. I don't think it's a matter of being dismissive to the West or the East, for that matter, or, for the continent. But that being the beginning of civilization, is easy to make that connection, but it's not necessarily done with with there being an issue with other parts of Africa. You know what I'm saying? And then I
No,
was
that's
adding
fair.
that we're relocating, like we're not relocating to Egypt now. For the most part, a lot of us are headed to the west. So I don't think there's like a big differentiation of one is better than the other one per se. But with that being the beginning, like you don't necessarily need a specific connection. You know what I'm saying? When it comes to like your genetic makeup, it's like, hey, this is where it all began. So I'm gonna sit in this for a minute as we're figuring things out. And that comment about the pyramids were just about grandeur, I think that I completely disagree with that.
Okay.
Those were functioning buildings. You know what I'm saying? And they're one of the few that is still remaining today. They were not just funeral hubs, you know. So or just places, you know, for the king to show off. Those were functioning facilities and buildings for the various people throughout that space. So yeah, that's my thing is that, yeah, I don't think it's a matter of us being dismissive or us having an issue like we just don't want to recognize the West because of the trauma we had up out of there. Nah, it's just easier to make that connection in Kemet, but it always winds up expanding to the West for us as African Americans. At least my experience with those who are interconnected,
Yeah,
with bridging
I'm
that
glad
gap
I'm
between
sorry.
America and you know and motherland.
Now I'm glad you said that because I even want to apologize if I came off that way because one thing you know about you know with the Mental Dialogue Community Club and you know this is an extension of that show is I don't even like to have either or conversation. So even if so the fact that you're addressing it that lets me know I came off as if it was an either or. I'm just highlighting that this is a hole that's missing for most of us. Is why we have another name, and so I just like to highlight the need for it and say this. I'm gonna let Brother Supreme Rock get in this thing is. The need for understanding. It was very intentional how they would separate us when, in a sense, they brought us to this land. There was rituals they went through to ensure we wouldn't know that period. So if there was an effort made for us not to know, I clamor and recommend that we at least learn pieces of that because if it was an effort for us not to know, it's probably affecting us today in ways we don't always psychologically realize. Go ahead, Supreme Rock.
Peace and Black Power.
Yeah,
Can you
no
hear
doubt.
me?
Yeah, you loud and three.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hey, brother, jump in where you fit in.
I just came on. I don't know what's been spoken about already, but
you just hit the link as you jumped in. But yeah, just whatever
I
you feel like.
I seen the title, and I've seen this debate on social media on African Americans. You know, which part of Africa we should connect to or understand or study. And from my understanding and from my experience and what I've been taught, we have the most unique situation on the planet, being kidnapped and robbed of our culture, language, religion, gods, and everything.
Agreed.
And I think that whatever a person chooses to connect with, whatever part of Africa, whatever spiritual system that we choose to connect with is A-OK. We don't have to choose and say, well, most likely my ancestors were stolen from the west coast of Africa or the west central. If I study comedic science and I connect with Heru or Saw or Set, then I don't see why somebody would have a problem with that. If that's what makes me a better human being. You know what I'm saying?
Right on.
We was divided. We was divided, man. So whatever leads us back to Africa, whether it's Ifa, Voodoo, or
Palo,
the
Santeria,
hundreds upon hundreds of African spiritualities that we can choose from and study, knock yourself out.
Hey, fair enough.
The Dogon of West Africa.
Let me ask you this, because now that I understand you kind of just jumped on, kind of in the middle of it. So I just want to hear one thought on this. So for me, since you missed it, for me, it's not even about the argument of where, in a sense, we should be per se, right? I'm focused on the idea that there's a hole in our connection since we know the least about it, there's a level of importance that should, in a sense, be associated with it from the standpoint of it was intentionally done for us not to know about that period. And so
Can I say this?
Let me.
I
I'm
know.
almost finished. I'm almost finished. So I just want to highlight that there's a lot of things that our ancestors from that period brought to this country that we don't even know about. So it plays a role. Like I mentioned, you know, we brought watermelon, we brought black eyed peas and things of that nature. So a lot of things that I never learned until I was in my 30s. I would like to make sure my children are learning that in their 40s. So I'm not placing a level of importance over how we get back to Africa. I'm just talking about learning about a period that a lot of us know the least about. So I'm just highlighting it simply for that standpoint, not necessarily making an argument over either or. Go ahead, brother.
I think from my experience and being around particularly people that's so-called conscious and people that's studying knowledge itself, I think it's balanced out in 2022. I know more people that study and practice Western African culture and spiritual systems than I do people that Kemetic. Now, 10 years ago,
I know both.
10 years ago, you have more people saying Hotep and connecting with the Kemetic deities. But right now, I know way more people that study E5, practice E5 than anything. And I think with studying and practicing E5, then they also learn about the foods and customs that came over from those people. So I think
you see that spreading out kind of just throughout the not just conscious community. I think it's a niche. So do you think you see that out publicly, just with African Americans in general?
Especially, you would be surprised how many young hood cats practice E5 right now.
Yes.
Okay. No joke.
Yes.
No joke.
Yeah, I respect your experience.
And also, like people with money who are getting their DNA, who's able to actually make the travel, that is making that, you know what I'm saying, that recognition of, you know what I'm saying, of our West African connections as well.
Right. So yeah, I'll just tell you, my work in the public school system is, you know, my relative experience is our children know very little of any history, unfortunately. People that looks like themselves or whatever. And like I said, I put the onus on and I always recommend that our parents do it. You know what I mean? And so I just wanted to address if there's a psychology of avoidance, then I wanted to address that. And I still see even a group that's real big about indigenous, and I will say this personally, they over-identify with it to the extent that I don't see those solutions as fathomable for 2022. So I still see that a lot, and people who don't know much. So I'm glad to hear your experience is different than mine, which is fair. You know what I mean? But it's just my work in the public schools, I'm always trying to input our children who not getting it with, you know, what little piece I can, but I'm limited in an after school program because we're just not teaching. So I don't see it as much even in Atlanta, unfortunately, for me personally. But again, that's my one relative.
Do you know sometimes you got to know what to look for. Sometimes you got to know what to look for. Like I was just watching Cameron interview on Drink Champs, and he had his homeboy with him, and I noticed that he had some Elekes under his shirt.
Warriors, yeah, the Elekes and the Warriors, yeah.
You see what I'm saying? You gotta, you know. So I'm not saying that your experience ain't true, but sometimes you guys gotta know what to look for and what to listen for.
Yeah,
well, thank y'all for y'all input. That's what this is, man. We're trying to raise the culture together. You know what I mean? So
I do want to add that if I have a moment really quickly.
I'll let you add that.
Yes, Montoya, the psychological trauma still exists within our community of the of that wall between us and our culture past America. You know what I'm saying? Because yes, I mean that's years of having to undo, right. You know what I'm saying, what has been programmed. It wasn't until I went off to college that I had even considered Africa a different way of how I grew up. You know, we was the African after and the, right. You know what I'm saying? All we knew was flies and malnutrition kids, you know, and the white people.
You was an African booty scratcher.
Right. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. So part of this dialogue is to, you know, we want to improve it,
and that still exists right now.
How old we were right now. I'm working getting that consciousness. We're just having a dialogue, hoping we can encourage a few parents to jump into it a little sooner with their children, because we don't even fault our parents for not doing it. We understand
But
why
because
they
a lot
didn't
of
do
them
it
don't
for
know
us.
though.
Yeah,
I work
so
in
we're not
inner
even
city
faulting
schools
them.
too.
Here's a chance to raise the culture, have these dialogues, because I ain't caring about right and wrong as much as, you know, different, like you said. I don't know what to look for. I love that thought. You know what I'm saying? Now I can go learn what to look for. That's all part of raising the culture. So thank y'all for jumping on, man. I'm gonna end it like I always do with a piece from my upcoming book, Just My 3 Cents. We deep dive on Saturdays. Wednesday night is just a quick hitter. Hopefully people got something to think about.
I know we got a book in store. Uh-oh.
Yep, it's coming, brother. It's coming. Yep. So
Hey,
thank y'all for jumping on.
I'm gonna chime in when I chime in, bro.
Of course, always. I'm glad you got on here, Corey. You should have jumped on, man. You had I thought I showed this to Corey because I don't think I've ever had him jump on my show before. But I see your comments. We at the end, so I'm not gonna read through your comments. But I will say this: we welcome different thought, brother. So you couldn't have ruined this show because that ain't how we move in this space. Jendai is one of my Queens of Intellect members. She knows she can completely vehemently disagree with me. We will talk and kiss at the end. Like that's just who we are. Supreme Rock.
I don't have a problem getting on your ass and schooling you. I'm out. Peace and Black Power. Peace, Queen.
Indeed.
Absolutely. We welcome it here, man. So don't ever think that in the future, hit that link, man. We would definitely prefer to get your voice on here. Because like I said, I'm at the end now, so I'm not gonna read through all the comments. But thank you for watching today. Keep that in mind. All right, Queen, I'm gonna let you go and I'm gonna knock this piece out for my upcoming book. And we out this thing. So again, I have an upcoming book called Necessary Conversations, Just My 3 Cents on Race, Sex, and Culture. And so it's basically a book that's set up to create dialogues like this. So these are just relatively short commentaries where the goal is you hear something that tweaks you to talk to others. So so the book is not necessarily just to be read through. It's for you to get a commentary and have a dialogue about what you hear. I don't write these pieces necessarily for agreement or even disagreement for that matter. I intentionally leave some open thoughts out there to create dialogue. So just when you hear this piece, if you hear something that triggers you to want to talk about it, that's what the book is for. So this book is called Black Socrates Speaks, America, Home Sweet Home. And I made up a little quote. I said, as long as mine are good, I'm straight. And I labeled that American rugged individualism. I'm gonna say the quote one more time. As long as mine are good, I'm straight. American rugged individualism. What if previous generations of African Americans adopted American rugged individualism? We'd probably still be experiencing the same tragedies we've tried to forget about for the last 50 to 100 years. The Black Lives Matter started after the tragedy of Trayvon Martin, but it was truly born out of our failure to remind ourselves of the sacrifices our ancestors, like the Freedom Riders, for example. The new generation has been forced into action because for far too long, our inaction has taught them this idea that their lives don't matter. Even as a member of the first fatherless generation, we tend to look at young people today and say they don't care about anything. However, the truth is they can look at us and say, since you didn't show us a better way, we got this. Dave Chappelle said it best in his 846 stand-up commentary about George Floyd when he said, you kids are excellent drivers. I'm comfortable in the backseat of the car, so carry on, young ones. What we fail to realize is that it is, again, our failure as the older generation to connect to the young ones to the sacrifices of our ancestors in this country, which in turn widens the generation gap. It has become cliche to say, if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. As African Americans, how silly is it for us to disregard Brother Malcolm X's advice and leave it up to the school system to teach our Black children who they are and who they were? That obligation should not only fall on the parents, but also the entire community to make sure our young ones know their ancestors came from something other than enslavement. Think about this. How come we don't know anything in a country that was literally built on our backs? Yes, we could blame the white man, but the truth is our ancestors already paid the price for us to start building wealth now. Without knowing our history, we have no foundation upon which to build. Despite America's tragic past, this country is just as much ours, if not more, as it is anyone else's. With that being said, I still applaud any African American who is financially preparing to leave the country at this juncture, because there are wonderful opportunities in various countries, in particular in countries on continental Africa. However, if there are no plans to leave, plan to stay by taking ownership of a country, again, built on the blacks of our ancestors. Prior to the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln once invited a contingent of African-American leaders to the White House lawn to discuss if he should advocate to the U.S. Congress to send all the black people back to Africa. But those black leaders within the black community, clearly under much worse conditions than we face today, told Lincoln, we are 200 plus years removed from our homeland and know nothing about Africa. America is our home. Just my 3 cents. So if that piece would spark you to talk, that's what this book is for. See y'all next Wednesday. Salute y'all. Hope we made it make sense.